news gets worse and worse for New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. There's no smoking gun to prove that she was corrupt, but lots more today to suggest she should have known that her then boyfriend was. Now, Berejiklian had a 5-year affair with disgraced former MP Daryl Maguire, one that she continued even after she sacked him 2 years ago for trying to peddle his influence for cash. It's been out there for a long time. Maguire today gave more evidence to the Independent Commission Against Corruption and started by apparently trying to protect Berejiklian. He said he wasn't sure how much detail he'd given her about the property developers he was doing dodgy deals with, wasn't sure how much detail he'd given her about a land deal at Badgerys Creek he was trying to broker for Louise Waterhouse that he hoped to earn $1.5 million from. Although he had been secretly taped, telling Berejiklian to expect an email from her about all that. But he did admit to telling Berejiklian he was $1.5 million in debt and asking her for advice on his deals.
I would have raised it to her. I only have a few friends that you can raise these things with, and I would have run it past her perhaps to get some, get a view.
And when you say run it past her, you mean run what past her?
Just what I was thinking in terms of, doing with property or trying to solve some issues.
So a general discussion of the kind of problems that you're attempting to fix, is that a fair summary?
General problems I was having in life, yes.
Maguire was also secretly taped telling another property developer, Joseph Alha, that he'd given Berejiklian a letter from Alha about one of his developments. And he later took that same property dealer to a meeting with the Premier.
Back to the drop-in with the Premier. You're present, Mr Alha's present, and the Premier's present, correct?
Yes.
Anyone else present?
Not that I recall.
And what was discussed during the course of that drop-in?
It was greetings, niceties. My recollection, it was less than 2 minutes that we were there to say hello. Premier was working at a desk. That's my recollection, and we were gone.
Was there any discussion of any matters relating to planning?
No.
Was there, whether that be in a general policy sense or in a site-specific sense?
No, it was general niceties. That is my best recollection.
But as you heard, Maguire made sure to distance Berejiklian. No, he hadn't actually given her that letter from the developer. No, they hadn't all discussed business when he brought that developer to her office. And no, Berejiklian had nothing to help him. Nothing. Which is what she says too. But he was realistic enough to know their relationship was now over.
At the time of this call, were you in a close personal relationship with Ms Berejiklian?
Yes. Yes.
Are you still in a close personal relationship with Ms Berejiklian?
Oh, not after the events of this, I wouldn't be.
I was joined earlier by former federal Labor leader Mark Latham, now leader of One Nation in the New South Wales Parliament. Mark Latham, thank you so much for joining me. Look, it seemed to me that Daryl Maguire started the day trying to say, well, look, I don't know really what I told Gladys Berejiklian, trying to protect her, trying to make sure that no one could think that she knew what he was up to. But I'm not sure, as the day wore on, that stood up very well.
No, he seemed to deliver 3 pieces of information which were very instructive. One, that he took a land developer with a project at Canterbury in inner Sydney down to the Premier's office, and they had what they call a drop-in meeting where obviously the land development and this guy's financial interests and Maguire's were most likely discussed. And secondly, the news that he told the Premier about his $1.5 million debt, and the solution to that was the land deal at Badgerys Creek on behalf of the Waterhouse family. So at that point, the alarm bell should have been ringing for Gladys Berejiklian. And then I suppose on a personal note from Maguire, towards the end when he was asked would he get back with Gladys Berejiklian, he said no, not after this hearing, indicating he wasn't all too happy with her evidence on Monday and the way she's using the bad man defence. It's reminiscent of Julia Gillard and Bruce Wilson. As you said last night, Andrew, all us blokes who get attacked and all that, we can and never would blame a so-called bad woman, but it seems to be a get-out-of-jail card for political leaders of the female gender.
Now, I should say that the evidence that Maguire gave today was in that 2-minute drop-in meeting with that property developer, Arla, that it was just general chit-chat, he says, that they didn't really, get into business. You don't believe that?
No, well, Arla wasn't there for a haircut. He's tightly focused on getting his development through. Maguire's tightly focused on getting his commission or his kickback. Arla definitely wanted to meet Gladys, not to say hello, but to press his financial interest to get his project through at Canterbury and get the money for it. And Maguire the same. So they didn't go down there just as a courtesy. They went down there to push his financial interest and inform the Premier of how important it was to be supporting this bloke. Obviously, the meeting would have gone for longer than 2 minutes. It's the Premier's boyfriend who's dropped down there with the property developer, and hopefully Gladys Berejiklian will be recalled to the ICAC to give a full account of that conversation.
Now, her defence is that she did nothing to help her boyfriend. She wasn't aware of what Kwati was up to, and that if there'd been any conflict of interest in his role between being an MP and what he was these deals he was trying to make on the side, he would have noted that it was his responsibility to tell Parliament about that, not hers. How is all that flying for you?
Well, I think very poorly. It's not flying for her at all. It's a bit of a Led Zeppelin in that she'd have to be willfully blind to all these contacts, all this talk of money, all his wheeling and dealing, his projects, the land developer who came down there for the walk-in meeting, the email from Louise Waterhouse, the news that he had $1.5 million in debt he was hoping to clear at Badgerys Creek. And I think in terms of public policy decision-making, the most bizarre of all, that in the middle of 2018, where Maguire had a planning minister, Anthony Roberts, who wouldn't talk to him anymore, and had run into a dead end with the Greater Sydney Commission, the strategic land use planning body in Sydney, Gladys Berejiklian herself, as Premier, took over direct control of that important authority. And Maguire had access to the minister in charge at breakfast, on the couch at night, weekend walks, as lovers. He had full access to her for the body that mattered most to him in getting the Badgerys Creek rezoning through in particular. So if Gladys Berejiklian was trying to keep this guy at arm's length, why did she take direct control of a key planning body and take it off the planning minister who wasn't talking to her boyfriend?
Now, there's also another side issue here. Maybe it's not a side issue, it is a big issue, I don't know, that one of the groups that he was trying to help, there were Chinese property developers he was also trying to help and give access to as well. Now, when you're doing essentially dirty deals on the side, that becomes a security risk, doesn't it? That becomes something that someone unscrupulous could hold over Maguire and possibly the Premier.
Well, absolutely. And as I said in Parliament earlier today, Maguire was surrounded by Chinese money and surrounded by Chinese agents. He had been the beneficiary of travel expenses to China from 2 Chinese agents who'd funded the Labor MP, the late Labor MP Eric Fitzgibbon, decades ago. They also funded Maguire. And furthermore, he was part of a key player in what was called the Council for the Peaceful Reunification of China, which was a Chinese government united front group chaired by Huang Xiangmo, the notorious Chinese agent, now banned from Australia, who was the key player in the Dastyari scandal. So Gladys Berejiklian went to those events with Maguire. Coincidentally, they would have met up there. But she was at the events with Huang Xiangmo, photographed and so forth in 2015. She knows her boyfriend's surrounded by Chinese money in these land deals. She knows that these people are Chinese agents. She had an obligation, clearly, under the Turnbull laws of foreign political interference, to notify the security authorities. Because Maguire had been in China, his phone was tapped. Most likely the Chinese knew of the relationship. We didn't in New South Wales, but the Chinese would have known. And in the way of these things, they would use that secret quite possibly to extract political concessions in New South Wales to the benefit of the Chinese Communist government. That's how it works. I know it sounds a bit James Bond, but Chinese political interference in Australia is real. We've got laws about it, and Gladys Berejiklian should have notified the authorities of the relationship with Maguire. It seems that she didn't, and it's another sign of appalling judgment and reckless behaviour for which she should resign.
Now, to be fair to her, I should repeat, she says she didn't know what he was up to. She didn't know he was breaking any laws. She didn't suspect, and she didn't do anything to help any of his business deals. And as far as I can see, there is no evidence that she did. But, you know, we're still only part way through all this. Mark Latham, in mentioning all these things, and I can sense through the TV screen I'm getting some of the reaction again. I get so many people saying, look, Gladys Berejiklian's a nice woman, a decent woman, just unlucky in love. She's the best thing going. She's been an excellent Premier, and I agree she's been the best Premier in trying to handle, you know, the proper balance in dealing with the coronavirus crisis. All that kind of stuff. Give her a break. This is just blood in the water feeding frenzy. What's your response to that?
Well, if people say we know Gladys and we like Gladys, they've got to ask themselves, did you really know Gladys? Because the Gladys Berejiklian we're learning about now from this 5-year clandestine relationship with a property developer is very different to the way she presented at the last election. And in fact, that deception is a thing that I particularly grate against, in that the key point to own up to the authorities, report this guy, and certainly break off the relationship was when he left the Parliament in disgrace, and the ICAC investigation started up in the middle of 2018. But Gladys didn't do that, not because she loves New South Wales, not because she's thinking of the public interest, because she knew it would end her chances of running for the re-elected Premier in March 2019, 9 months later. She knew she'd be finished in politics if she went and did the ethical and right thing in reporting this guy for the wrongdoing. So she put herself first. This was an act of selfishness. And I'm afraid that is the final straw in politics. And on all these counts, Andrew, the 20 or 30 matters here that count against. At one level, it's kind of absurd. We're in the theatre of the absurd to think she's still the Premier today, and she won't be this time next week, I'm sure.
Mark Latham, thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.